There is a certain poetry to her address. The Duchess of York, once the subject of ridicule, now surrounded by marble, clipped lawns, and the kind of quiet wealth that photographs well. Yet, if the walls of her Windsor estate could speak, they might whisper not of triumph, but of endurance. A life rebuilt, not through inheritance, but through improvisation. Sarah Ferguson's story is one of contradictions carved in stone. Her £15 million estate near Windsor Castle stands as a monument to her survival, and to the peculiar economics of modern royalty. It is not a palace granted by bloodline, but a purchase financed through persistence, connections, and calculated charm. Within those manicured acres lies the delicate truth that she has never quite escaped, the costs of belonging to a family that both sustains and sidelines her. Once, her missteps were splashed across front pages, debts mounting, doors closing, reputation in tatters. Today, the gates open again, polished, welcoming. But beneath the fresh veneer of respectability, the arithmetic remains uneasy. Reports suggest that much of her comfort depends on ventures beyond royal paychecks: publishing, speaking engagements, business partnerships. Independence, in her case, was never a choice. It was survival repackaged as reinvention. And so, she occupies a curious place in Britain's royal imagination. A woman too familiar to forget, too flawed to fully restore. A duchess without a public role, yet never without attention. As cameras glide over her country estate, ivy climbing the brickwork, rain tracing patterns on the glass, the question quietly lingers. Has Sarah Ferguson reclaimed dignity, or merely redesigned debt? Because in the monarchy's long narrative of privilege and penance, she stands as both an echo and a warning, proof that even redemption in the royal world comes with interest attached. After the tabloid storms of the 1990s, Sarah Ferguson did what few royal exiles ever dared. She stayed visible. When the headlines stopped calling her Fergie the Fallen, she began to reintroduce herself as something else entirely. An author, an advocate, an optimist. The Duchess who had once sold stories to survive now sold something far subtler: resilience. Her children's books filled the shelves of British nurseries, their soft illustrations masking a harder truth: that behind every moral fable lay the echo of her own lessons in loss. Then came the autobiographies: My Story, Finding Sarah, Reinvention. Each was a confession wrapped in self-help, an attempt to reclaim authorship over a life that the press had once written for her. Television, too, became her second court. In America, she was welcomed not as scandal, but as spectacle, a guest with the candour of confession and the accent of royalty. She spoke about wellness, about forgiveness, about new beginnings. For a while, the world listened. She was praised for her honesty, for her refusal to vanish into shame. But independence, in her world, was never simple. Each appearance carried a fee. Each project carried expectation. The empire she built from redemption was fragile, dependent on contracts, goodwill, and the occasional helping hand from the same institution that once turned her away. Reports would later suggest that her ventures, from lifestyle brands to production deals, rarely matched the ambition of their marketing. She chased solvency the way others chase relevance, tirelessly, gracefully, sometimes desperately. Yet even in misstep, she maintained that unmistakable blend of humour and hope. Britain, weary of cynicism, found itself quietly rooting for her. Her connection to Prince Andrew, unwavering, inexplicable, enduring, added another layer to her public puzzle. She lived on his estate, holidayed in his company, defended him when few dared. It was loyalty that looked at times like dependence, and affection that risked appearing like denial. Still, she insisted theirs was a bond beyond labels, a phrase that only deepened the ambiguity. In charity work, she found her truest grace. From children's welfare to health awareness campaigns, her name still drew cameras, and she used that spotlight, however borrowed, to point toward causes greater than herself. Yet one cannot help but sense the melancholy beneath her momentum, the quiet fatigue of a woman forever auditioning for redemption. As the footage fades, from smiling book signings and glittering gala halls to empty hotel corridors and folded papers on a desk, the question returns, faint but persistent. Was this reinvention, or merely endurance dressed as optimism? Because in the end, Sarah Ferguson's greatest talent was not transformation itself, but the ability to make survival look like success. By the early 2000s, the facade of recovery began to tremble. Behind the laughter, the speeches, and the polished appearances, a quieter reality persisted. One of unpaid invoices, failed ventures, and favours owed. Sarah Ferguson had rebuilt her image, but not her foundations. The castles she spoke from were often borrowed, and the confidence she projected was carefully financed. Her lifestyle, by royal standards, was modest, yet by her own means, unsustainable. Reports of mounting debts surfaced with familiar rhythm. 6 figures, then 7. Friends spoke of cash flow problems, of business partners left waiting. Each attempt to reset the ledger, a book deal, a television contract, a charitable initiative, bought time, but not peace. The Duchess had turned survival into performance, but offstage, the numbers refused to behave. What complicated her struggle wasn't greed, but attachment. For all her talk of independence, she remained tethered to the very institution that had once exiled her, and, more specifically, to the man at its margins. Her relationship with Prince Andrew blurred every boundary the public tried to draw. They lived together at Royal Lodge, shared staff, shared meals, shared history. It was a domestic arrangement that invited both sympathy and suspicion. To some, their enduring closeness felt redemptive, proof that love can outlast scandal. To others, it looked like entanglement, a refusal to let go of the comforts that shadowed her downfall. Sources described loans repaid, debts forgiven, doors opened by his quiet influence. Independence, in the truest sense, was always just out of reach, and as Andrew's own reputation began to darken in the following decades, the cost of her loyalty deepened. What had once been seen as affection now looked, to many, like poor judgment. The Duchess, who once symbolised survival, found herself haunted by the choices that tethered her survival to his. In the court of public opinion, proximity is complicity, and even silence has a price. Still, through it all, she smiled. At charity events, she spoke about forgiveness and second chances, her voice steady even as the headlines whispered otherwise. Perhaps it was habit, perhaps it was hope, but those who knew her best described a woman torn between pride and pragmatism, aware of her predicament, yet unwilling to relinquish the life she had fought to remain near. In the dim light of Windsor, one can imagine her study. A stack of letters unanswered, a phone ringing too long, rain drawing slow rivers down the glass, every bill paid with borrowed grace, every act of loyalty another thread in the web she could never quite escape. For Sarah Ferguson, independence was never the absence of reliance, only the art of disguising it beautifully. It began, as these things often do, with a handshake and a hidden camera. In the spring of 2010, Sarah Ferguson sat across from a man she believed to be a businessman. In truth, he was a journalist, and his briefcase held not contracts, but a concealed recorder. Over cups of tea, amid polite laughter, the Duchess spoke of introductions, possibilities, and influence. Then came the number, £500,000, a price she implied for access to Prince Andrew. The footage broke overnight. Within hours, it dominated every front page and every broadcast. The images were grainy, the setting mundane, yet the implications were seismic. The Duchess, who had spent years rebuilding herself as a philanthropist and author, was once again cast as the monarchy's most familiar cautionary tale. She apologised immediately, her statement trembling with regret. "I was in the gutter," she said, "and I've been there before." There was no defiance this time, only exhaustion. To some it was the sound of sincerity. To others, it was the performance of someone long accustomed to contrition. But beneath both interpretations lay a truth too stark to ignore. Desperation had replaced ambition. Britain watched, not with fury, but with weary recognition. The episode felt less like betrayal and more like inevitability, the culmination of years spent juggling image and insolvency, grace and need. The nation that had once mocked her for indulgence now saw something sadder. A woman who had outlived the patience of both palace and press. The monarchy responded with its usual choreography of distance. Courtiers offered polite silence. Statements were brief, measured, and mercilessly cold. Within the walls of Royal Lodge, lights burned late into the night, but outside, the narrative was already sealed. She had once again become an emblem of royal misjudgment, proof that warmth without restraint can turn to weakness in a world that prizes discretion above all else. Her daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, stood by her. Friends described her as broken but not bitter. Yet the damage was done, not just to her reputation, but to the fragile illusion of recovery she had so carefully maintained. In the end, it wasn't the sum that scandalised Britain. It was the symbolism. A duchess, once denied by privilege, attempting to monetise its shadow. As the newsreels fade, the headlines looping, the flashbulbs dimming, we return to a quieter image. The gates of Windsor closing, rain pooling beneath them, a single light flickering out in an upstairs window. Not the blaze of disgrace this time, but something quieter. The sound of someone who finally realised that redemption, like influence, cannot be sold. And yet, she endured. In the years that followed her public unravelling, Sarah Ferguson did not disappear into exile. She did what she had always done, adapted. Slowly, quietly, she found her way back into the royal frame, not as a headline, but as a presence. At weddings, jubilees, and family gatherings, she appeared beside the same man once called her undoing. Her familiar red hair, a reminder that resilience too can become hereditary. Motherhood became her redemption, not through spectacle, but through constancy. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie grew into poised, grounded women who spoke of their mother not as a scandal, but as an anchor. They praised her humour, her openness, her ability to turn difficulty into dialogue. Through them, the public saw a different Duchess, one whose legacy was not embarrassment, but endurance. In her later years, the tone of her life softened. The sharpness of scrutiny dulled with time, replaced by something gentler, curiosity, even affection. On social media, she presented a quieter world. Dogs at her feet, tea on a table, morning walks through the grounds of Royal Lodge. The images were ordinary, almost defiantly so, as though to prove that peace need not always be polished. Charitable work continued, children's welfare, literacy, health awareness, but it no longer felt like penance. Instead, it seemed to reflect a woman who had finally stopped performing her recovery and started living it. Age, and perhaps fatigue, had made her gentler with herself. The nation too began to soften. In a monarchy increasingly defined by transition, divorce, death, renewal, Sarah Ferguson came to symbolise something oddly reassuring: the possibility of outlasting disgrace without bitterness. She remained flawed, certainly, but familiar. The public, who once laughed, now nodded in recognition. She had become, in her way, one of them. Human, fallible, still standing. Within Windsor's quiet circles, her loyalty never faltered. Her continued closeness to Prince Andrew puzzled some, comforted others. But for her, it seemed less about image and more about history, the kind that refuses to be rewritten. As twilight settles over Windsor, the camera might find her walking the gardens, a candle flickering in the study behind her. Not triumphant, not defeated, simply present. In a family that prizes perfection, Sarah Ferguson remains its necessary reminder that imperfection, endured with grace, can still belong. And perhaps that is her final legacy. Not grandeur restored, but humanity reclaimed. The noise around Sarah Ferguson has faded. What remains is something quieter, not triumph, not disgrace, but endurance. For decades, she has been Britain's reluctant constant, too human to vanish, too familiar to restore. In a family that prizes polish, she offered something the monarchy never quite knew how to handle: warmth without calculation. Her loyalty to Prince Andrew still divides opinion. To some, it is devotion, to others, denial. Yet even her critics concede that her affection, however misplaced, was real. It blurred boundaries and softened scandals. But it also revealed what royal life so often hides: the ache to belong, even when belonging hurts. Through every storm she faced, she never disowned herself. The laughter that once drew scorn became the proof of her persistence. She outlasted the front pages, the ridicule, the exile. She grew older in view of the world and learned to live, if not admired, then accepted. Perhaps that is her quiet achievement. While others were defined by titles or tragedy, she became defined by continuation, the simple refusal to disappear. Tonight, as Windsor settles under its pale sky, one light still glows in the distance. A candle, a memory, a name that endures not for grandeur, but for grace under weight. Because in the end, Sarah Ferguson's story is not about scandal, nor even redemption. It is about the persistence of the human spirit, flawed, forgiving, and unguarded, within the cold geometry of monarchy. And that, perhaps, is where her truth will remain. Not in perfection, but in the courage to be seen imperfectly.